A food allergy diagnosis changes your life. It affects you, your family, your education, your career, your everything. That being said, as with all adversity in life, you have choices on how you can handle it. Some people choose to raise their hands, stand up, and get involved as advocates. They look food allergy right in the face and say, "I've got this." And they focus their energy on empowering others to feel the same way. These food allergy warriors range in age and background, but have one thing in common. They turned their food allergy story into action. Now I'm going to shine a light on them to inspire you to join the fight against food allergies. This is Take Action with Holly Bayardo. Hi, and welcome to Take Action. I'm Holly Bayardo. I'm a food allergy mom, advocate, and proud member of FAIR's Board of Governors. And today I'm thrilled to chat with Holly Bayardo. She's also a food allergy mom and the creator of Killer Food Allergies, one of my favorite podcasts. Holly, welcome. Thanks for joining me
Hillary,
today.
Thank you for having me. Great to be here.
So I've been a fan of yours for quite a while. I would like to tell you that you are my friend that I bring on walks with me, and I've listened to many episodes and love your podcast. Before we get there though, I want to start at the beginning and just tell me a little bit about food allergies in your family.
Yeah, well, first of all, thank you for tuning in and listening and your support. That means the world to me. I appreciate that. So a lot of my story, I actually kind of learned in hindsight, like probably a lot of food allergy parents have, but really didn't come to the party in terms of what was happening with my, at the time, my oldest daughter, until she was about 3 or 4. I have 2 daughters. They are now 12 and 13. So we've been at this, I would say, close to 10 years. So my oldest daughter, she was the one who around 3 or 4 would just spontaneously vomit often. And I just figured she had a flu with no fever. You know, I had no idea what was going on. 10 years ago or so, the conversation around food allergies was more focused on this peanut allergy thing. You didn't hear about it much. Once in a while, it was coming up at the cottage program at schools. But I just really didn't know much about the whole world that is food allergies. I think what happened was I noticed that I was able to make the connections. I noticed that her reactions were coming, or reactions is now the word I use, not the word I used then because I didn't know what was going on. But her episodes, if you will, were starting to happen more fast and more furious right after she ate. So I was starting to make these connections, and then probably just heard something in the news about peanut allergy, this, that, and the other, and thought, okay, so maybe she's dealing with some of this stuff. So I did what I think a lot of moms do. And I started asking around at her school and was directed to an allergist. Took her for an appointment and thought, okay, they're going to say, yeah, she's a little sniffly, sneezy. She probably has some allergy issues, but just throw some, antihistamine at her, she'll be fine. No, 4 hours later, I was in a puddle of tears, just not knowing what hit me. And of course, after a prick test, she was diagnosed with just a ridiculous amount of food allergies. And I was told that it was life-threatening and dangerous, and we needed to have an EpiPen, whatever that was, with us at all times, and that everything in my refrigerator should probably be thrown away immediately. So yeah, that was how it started. I'm sure that story sounds very familiar for you. But then, it's like from there, all the puzzle pieces start to fit. And you start to see, now I realize that there were signs in infancy that she probably had an issue. You've probably heard a lot, people will say to you, for lack of a better way to make this distinction, I refer to us as the food allergy community, and then there's the non-allergic. So often the non-allergic will say, oh, but she'll grow out of it, I'm sure she'll get better. And I know it's very well-meaning, and I appreciate that. But for us, it's increasingly gotten worse. Every year we go for that allergy check, and I think they're going to say she's fine, there's no issues, I don't know what you've been worried about all this time. And then, of course, there's 2 or 3 new allergies for her. So that's been her story and her journey. It's been mostly focused on her food allergy issues. And then little sister came along shortly thereafter. Here comes little sister. Yes. And you know what they say about the youngest. So the little scene stealer, when she was born, she had a lot of issues with eczema. Another thing that, yeah, sure, she'll grow out of it. By the time she's 3 or 4, you won't even see it. Nope. It has increasingly gotten worse for her, which is great for, a 12-year-old in 6th grade, to have these bouts of eczema. But then she also has a lot of trouble with asthma, which is a very big deal for her because she's also an athlete. So it is something that we have to manage very carefully. And then last summer, I started seeing her when she would eat. I could see her reacting in a very similar way to my older daughter. I could see that her mouth was hurting. You know that when they feel it, yeah.
That face, but they don't want to tell you.
I could just see her like making that sort of motion with her mouth. And I thought, oh, here we go. I know it's happening. And I had suspected, because they both have oral allergy issues. So I wasn't too worried, but I felt like, okay, this is going to roll into something because it's just us. It's just, it's just our life, and we're all going to be impacted, and it is what it is. So yeah, last summer she had a drink, a soy-based drink, and it took her down. And I thought, okay, time to take the second one in for the prick test. And sure enough, there's plenty that she's allergic to now, and she needs to carry the EpiPen now. And it's interesting, Hillary, because the life-threatening piece for her, that diagnosis came when she was older. So it's almost harder to get in my experience. I mean, we just had a conversation about that this morning. In my experience with her, it's harder to sort of convince her that there's a real issue, a real concern, and that EpiPen needs to come with her. There's more of a, come on, I've been fine this long. I can't possibly have the same issues as my sister. So
and it's hard that it's also right in those like early teen years. That's sort of like a rough combination. And both of mine were diagnosed super, super early, and it's hard enough. I hear you. I would imagine it'd be very, very hard to then sort of develop this and have to change your life after you've already lived a certain way, hoping that seeing her sister has helped a little bit, but that's tough. You have your hands full, Mama.
Yeah. I am just rolling with it. I have my pity parties for sure. I do why me a lot. But I take it on with gusto, and my hope is just that, I walk that line between making sure they're protected and they have all the information they need and they're not terrified. So that's tough. And as they get older and they, especially with my younger one, she's very social. She loves to get out in the world. And so I just want to make sure that I'm reminding gently, not with terror in my eyes, but that I'm convincing her that it's a real thing and she needs to be very careful. But yeah, we have a lot of Post-it notes up. reminding us of certain things before we leave the house.
I was going to ask you, because this is such a relevant topic, and it's something that I'm not really there yet. So my oldest is 10 and a half, and I see the teen years coming, but they're not there. But I would love to hear your tips that you want to share with the audience for how to communicate to that younger teen audience. We all know that you're entering into the years that are sort of the scariest, where every kid at that age is starting to push back a little bit and try to figure out who they are, which is terrifying for us as food allergy parents. No. So what is working? I mean, tell me about the Post-it notes. Tell me anything else you guys have in your sort of house systems that's helping them sort of stay focused, if you will.
Reminders for sure. And just, being the podcast helps, because they think it's cool, oh, mommy's got a podcast. That's pretty cool. So it kind of, they have skin in the game with that. My older daughter's been on the podcast. The younger daughter wants to be on the podcast. So that will give her an opportunity to tell her story and to just really connect with her story. But yes, of course, we have notes on every door. It's not a Post-it note. I'm very creative. So I have crafted really nice, beautiful, perfectly cut out, laminated labels
nice.
that remind everybody to take their EpiPens. And we have, no less than like 16 EpiPens, so that they are everywhere, and easy for everybody to grab. One of the things that has happened that has helped this year in school, even though it's been kind of an odd year in school, is that they are officially in junior high, so that they're able to self-carry. And that just makes me feel better, that I know that in their backpack, their EpiPens are right there. And I also don't shy away from, as much as I know that they are very clear on how to call 911, how to use that EpiPen. That trainer, they're constantly, we're constantly reusing the trainer. I want to make sure that, as much as it feels like we got it, I keep doing it. And the trainer's out. I leave it out. So it's not like, it's something that they see, so that they know that it's important and it's part of our life. And it's kind of cool to hear the AviQ lady do her thing, right?
Yep. and
and show their friends.
Yes, and that makes me think of, I know that you interviewed Matt Bohms, who's also a friend of mine, and he talks about taking out his AviQ or his EpiPen, whatever device, and putting it on the table at dinner with his friends, which I was just loved that story. I loved the confidence, loved the sort of no care, like, this is me. Loved that everybody at the table knew what was going on. And you're doing something so similar at home. It's such a great tip. Yeah, just embrace it, define it in your own terms. Another thing that I don't wish this upon anybody, but of course it's very helpful. There's so many of in their friend group have food allergies. It's just that I always say, I always say when I'm in groups with other moms, okay, that whole 1 in 3 in every classroom, and I always see it, or 3 in 13 or whatever the statistic is. It's absolutely 100% in everything we're involved in. They're not the only ones. Several years back, my oldest daughter was the only one. But that's not the case anymore. And that's scary and not great news, but it lends itself to a little bit more empathy in the space, a few more people that have buy-in, a few more people that are going to help protect, right? So a lot of their friends that they hang out with are also armed with EpiPens. So there's safety in that. Yeah. It's true, whether it's just that they have them around, there's a whole bunch of EpiPens, or that their friends understand. I'm not sure what your situation is like. We have also same situation where we know a lot of food allergy families, but it's interesting the variety of food allergy families that you meet. And it made me think of this earlier when you said, people who get it and people who don't. I know, when people say, oh, well, won't she outgrow that? What I often hear from other food allergy families is, my child has food allergies, but not as bad as yours.
But not as bad.
And I'm always like, it just scares me. I'm like, I don't want it to be as bad as mine. It's just that mine have had anaphylactic reactions and yours haven't. Yeah. And so I don't know if you ever hear that, but that's sort of, while I'm grateful to have so many food allergy families in my life, just, strength in numbers. Sometimes I'm just like, there's no such thing as a mild allergy.
I know. I'm so with you on that. I come and go from, being that advocate out there and letting people know, it's not a small thing. If you've been diagnosed with a peanut allergy, then you really need to have your EpiPen. There's no it's never been so bad. But it gets so exhausting, right? To always be that person. And when you and I are working in the food allergy space, there's support and there's encouragement and there's like-mindedness, right? But then when we go to, a meeting at school or some sort of organization we're involved in, or we find ourselves on a sports field somewhere, we're the only food allergic people and we have to fight the fight. And it's so hard to receive those eye rolls constantly, or even when I'm standing with friends that, my peer group, they know me, they're in my daily life, but they don't have food allergies in their family. And they have to hear me say it again, and I can just feel them tensing up like, here we go.
There it is.
So I'll just step back because she's about to lecture that person. Yeah. So sometimes I just, I'm tired and I don't want to be the one who is constantly saying, yeah, the fact that your entire neck blew up when you got a bee sting, that's something that you should probably, take the next step with.
Yes. I know, but it's hard to be the allergy police, right? But somebody's got to do it.
Right.
So interesting that you talk about sort of being exhausted, because I certainly go through waves of being exhausted with all of this. And something that really spoke to me is I listened to one of your recent snack episodes. And you were talking about boundaries, basically, and how it had been a tough winter and a lot of stuff had been going on. And you had taken a step back and you needed to focus on your family because it wasn't cool to be doing your job and not being able to sort of be there with your girls. And I think this resonates with so many parents right now everyone's working from home, no matter what job you do in or outside of the house. Everyone's home. Everyone's been home for a long time. Trying to have that balance is really hard in and of itself. Then you add the emotional toll of what you're doing, which is constantly focusing on food allergy. And I do something similar in my own way. How does that all work? Because what you have created with this podcast is amazing, but I know it's so much work. So let's just maybe start at the beginning with how the podcast started and then how you're managing it now with your girls getting older and COVID. That's basically 5 questions in one.
I got it. And really good questions too. So I have a performance background. I went to the American Academy of Dramatic Arts after high school before I went to a 4-year college. So I had this like dueling sort of personality where I was really interested in performance of any kind, but I also, wanted to run a company. Then, fast forward to marriage and kids, my husband actually is in a complete work around the clock type of job. And I have kids who are sick. So I didn't want to work outside of the home. I also have an entrepreneurial spirit. Started my little mom hobby jobs, and, was kind of making lunch money here and there. And then all of a sudden this whole podcast thing had exploded. And I thought, you know what? I think I can do something like that in a closet, right? Where I am able to do something that's business oriented and it's focusing on something that is important in our lives, but it also has a little bit of a performance aspect to it. I think I'm going to just, check this whole scene out. So of course, I started with the best intentions of being very consistent and, kicking out weekly episodes. And as you know, this part's easy. It's the rest of it. I remember having a conversation with one of my friends who is, at least 10 years younger than me, if not a little bit younger than me. And she said, a little bit more than 10 years, she said to me, yeah, so if you're going to be on Instagram, you're going to want to post 6 times a week. I was like, I'm hard pressed to get one out there. I mean,
yeah, it's no joke.
I can't do that. Figuring out that balance of, the work-life balance, like any, parent is dealing with that, and I am very careful with my editing. It takes me an hour to edit every 10 minutes. That's about what I've figured out. And maybe sometimes longer. And then, hearing feedback about my podcast and just trying to figure out my lane with the podcast. That was the first year or so. And I definitely know my vision and what I want to do with it and how I want to approach it and the person I want to be in the food allergy space. But like you said, there's also a huge emotional toll. And I found that, and you can see where the consistency fell off, because I found that it was really hard to constantly around the clock be immersed in this world that is so difficult just to live in on a daily basis, which is part of the motivation too. I want that non-allergic audience to tune in and hear, hey, real thing, chronic disease, no cure, really hard. Can't just give her a cookie. Please listen to me and please understand. But yeah, that's just hard, right? And I did think once, I heard that we were never to leave the house again, I thought, well, okay, that's great. We'll all be home and I'll have more time to do the podcast because, we're not going to sporting events or this meeting or that. We're just at home. No, didn't work out. It's not so easy.
Nope. There basically was no time in any day ever for the last year.
No, it was like 75 grilled cheese sandwiches a day is what it was like. Yeah. So here I am just, trying to figure out what the next phase is, but I think it will always be that way. I am fortunate that I come from a place of just being able to do it because I want to, and because I feel like I'm adding some sort of value. I'm not trying to pay the mortgage with it. I try to stay focused on doing it in a way that works for me, as opposed to just getting wrapped up in, well, they're doing this, I better, hustle and add that too. No, I'm just going to do what I can do when I can do it.
Well, I think that's amazing. And it's definitely, I think it shows through. It's so authentic, and you really do, you become a friend in my ear, and I'm sure everybody feels that way. So thank you for what you're doing. And it's so interesting because one of my favorite things about food allergy parents and food allergy advocates is the pivot. And I've noticed you use this word a lot too, but I love to see people use their, previous life, their previous professional interests and background, and pivot into food allergy advocacy in their own personal way. So you're such a shining example of that. So thank you for what you're doing. And I wanted to note the other day, speaking of the good old Instagram, you did do a really great post about if you're thinking about starting a podcast.
Oh, so supportive in my advice.
what people should be thinking about. And I actually would love it if you would just highlight that here, because I love to show all the different ways you can become an advocate. So if there's anybody who's watching this who thinks they might be interested in a podcast, let's hear from the best here. So tell us about what you have to say for those thinking about starting a podcast.
Well, yes, I believe my first piece of advice was don't start a podcast, which I know does not sound very supportive, but I think that, I love the whole, just try it, just start it, just jump in and go for it. But I think I come from a place of, make sure you set your expectations appropriately. It is not easy to manage a full cycle of a podcast. I do not have a team, nor will I probably ever have a team. Although hopefully my daughters will start to enjoy this a little bit more. Maybe I can train them on some of the do's and don'ts. Maybe they can start doing the posting.
It's the teenagers who really know how to do all this anyway, honestly.
That's true. That's true. I did get an earful from the 12-year-old about my sound, which is something I'm constantly working on. It's a work in progress. If it's something that is truly motivating and you love it, and you're not trying to overnight monetize and get sponsorships and be, the next Joe Rogan, then absolutely jump on the podcast bandwagon, because it is such a great medium in terms of, being able to just chit chat and meet people. And I've learned so much about food allergies that I never even thought of. And I've learned so many tips and tricks from people, and the stories are so motivating for me. And if I'm reacting to my guests in that way, I'm assuming, a large portion of my audience is. But yeah, I think that if you want to do a podcast, you need to make sure that you can carve out a good 40 hours a week. I mean, it's a lot. It's not just interviewing and then publishing. It's a full cycle of checklists that you have to get through to make sure that you've got what you need to get your show up. So yeah,
it sounds like no joke. It sounds like no joke.
And I know,
I'm very fortunate here in that I do get to do this series with FAIR. So I have the support of an amazing creative services team, but all the work I do on my own for my website and Instagram is all me. And that's not the same as a podcast, but I do know it takes a ton of time. So I have mad respect for you.
Thank you.
But I would love to talk about your daughters if it's okay. I have heard Sammy on the podcast. I believe she's been on there twice. At least that's what I've heard. Yes. And she's a superstar. And it's really wonderful to hear a teenager talk about their food allergies, own their food allergies, have tips for other kids. I loved how she was earning a certain badge or next level belief for Girl Scouts by doing advocacy work. I also love, as a mom, the thought of getting to work with my kids. I'm starting to bring them in a little bit with what I do. Mm-hmm. It's really special. And as a woman who had a working mom, I always thought my mom was cool. And you mentioned that at the beginning. So I think it's so great in so many ways. Tell me about working with Sammy on the podcast. And if you think we'll get to hear more from her and about little sister, how is that all going? And what are your plans for that?
Yeah. So that's another great point in terms of how the podcast evolved, because when the whole thing started, my husband and I chatted about it and kind of, I wanted him to approve it because it was about our family and about our daughters in particular. And we started with no mention of their names. They're not going to appear on the podcast, no pictures of them on social media. And then we followed their lead. They showed an interest. I mean, my youngest daughter, her name is Sydney. She's like, what am I interviewing? I mean, come on, when's my turn? Like I'm busy. I'm trying to do the dishes. But yeah, so we just really, I waited till they were ready. And that's been an interesting journey because Sydney will be interesting. She's a good talker. I may never get her to like finish her story. Sammy, though, is a little bit more reserved. She's quite shy, and I'm trying to impress upon her how well she would be received. I want her to know that, you know, people are going to want to hear from you. They don't really care about what I have to say. They're not interested in my perspective. They want to hear from you. You're living with it. You're a teenager. You have a story to tell it. So we're at the point where she's just learning, you know, how to hold the mic so that her voice picks up. I mean, there's so many times where I'm like, you know, while we're in the middle of the podcast, and and then when I was at school, but you know, so we're getting through that, but they both are very interested in participating and continuing with the podcast. And I see spinoff, you know, the sisters Bayardo having their own show one day.
Oh, I love it.
Yeah. So we'll see.
That's fantastic. I would listen. Yeah. I know a lot of people would listen. Well, I think part of, at least what we've learned is part of living well with food allergies is just owning it and running with it. So good for you for setting the example, and kudos to them for wanting to get involved. I'm sure they're going to make a difference in their own way. And I can't wait to watch or hear. Listen.
Yeah.
Let's talk about school while we're talking about the girls, because school is like the elephant in the room for everyone with food allergies. And then you throw COVID and staying at home. How has your last year been? I believe Texas was out of school for a while and then you were back in. Just tell me sort of what the year has looked like for you guys.
It's been a blur. So yes, we are in Texas. They go to a private school. So the rules were a little bit different. They actually have spent time in person, which is great. I was concerned right away, of course, because the first thing I heard last summer was, you know, that they would be probably confined to one classroom and the teachers would move around. And they would eat there in the classroom. And so my concern was, okay, so now, you know, food used to happen in a dining hall, right? Now food allergens were going to be spread across the entire campus. And Sammy is sensitive to touch and smell as well. So there again, I felt like I was starting over, right? Sammy has a very different story and a different perspective, and she talks about it in that last episode. But for me, you know, I'm the mom. I'm going to freak out and be terrified. So I actually touched base with the school and put together a 4-page guideline for, you know, what I think would be great for them to consider. And some of it was considered, and I appreciate that. So they didn't go back. They started school. I don't know. They were supposed to start school in the beginning of August. They pushed back to the beginning of September. So they were distanced for a while, which was so relaxing for me, but it was torture for them. It was very difficult to do distance learning as a student. And then they went back in October and I was terrified, but you also just have to participate in the world, right? Yep. And it was fine. The only thing that she got at school was COVID. So, you know,
and you're like, why?
Okay. It's less scary than an anaphylactic reaction, I guess, but also scary in that, you know, I had no idea where this virus was going to take her and how it was going to impact her. And I was actually more scared that Sydney's quarantine was longer because they quarantine the siblings that aren't positive for COVID for a longer period of time. And I knew Sydney wasn't gonna sit well with her. And it did not.
It's hard. It's so hard. And I think the in and out of school is maybe even harder than just one, you know, just being out. So that's hard. And I'm sure the stress about, you know, how Sammy was feeling and going to do was not going to be good for anybody. So is she fully okay now?
She seems to be. She had all the symptoms, of course, because that's what happens to us, right? We have the worst case scenario and everything, right? Yeah. That's another thing where I felt a very similar reaction to the rhetoric that comes with food allergies is, there was a lot of, but she's fine. She's a kid. Kids don't really get it, right? They're asymptomatic. Okay. So she started with body aches and fever and exhaustion. She lost taste and smell. She was just, her chest was tight. In fact, at a point I was like, maybe I should epi her. She stayed home and she was in her room and in bed and didn't need to be hospitalized or anything, but she certainly had the virus. It was impacting her and she was sick. Yeah. So, but she's fine now. She lives to tell, has a great story for her kids. Oh yeah, I had that virus. When she's, quarantining with them, because there will be another pandemic, right?
Hopefully not for a very long time.
Yes.
But speaking of COVID, in your episodes, you have really had some excellent points. And I think a lot of us in the food allergy community have talked about how a silver lining, and like, I don't take anything away from how horrible this year has been and the loss that we have suffered in so many ways. And my heart goes out to families who've had to deal with this in any capacity, but there have been some silver linings for our community. Like, it's been nice to not have to deal with the birthday parties and the treats at school, and to constantly educate and, advocate and talk about food allergies and stand up for ourselves. And now, thankfully, wonderfully, we're slowly reemerging, I hope. Vaccinations and rates are going down and states are opening up. And so I've been thinking a lot about how we're going to transition back into the world. So how are you finding that in your family, food allergy wise? And are you as a family making any different decisions as you start to sort of re-engage with real life, as we'll call it?
Yeah, I don't think so. I mean, I think we'll just have to roll back into what we know, from previous to 12, 13 months ago. And it's all going to come at us. And just the other night, we were, the three of us were at an event outdoors. A lot of people there though. It's a mother and daughter organization we're involved with. It was snack time, and this mother was wandering around with a large box of Rice Krispie treats. And she was saying, if anybody has a peanut allergy, I have these Rice Krispie treats. And I was like, okay, so first of all, it's food allergies.
Yeah.
Thank you. And secondly, how's that serving the milk allergic? I just, again, you're just thrust right back into it. And it's back to, dealing with the same things that we dealt with previous to this in the same way. We either choose to jump into it and get involved and try to change the rhetoric here and there, or just smile and nod and dig into our bag for the snacks we brought for our kids.
All of our favorite snacks that are always in our huge mom bag. I've got those.
Yeah. I mean, I have the biggest bag. I mean, I'm sure moms are like, why does she carry that thing around? I got so much stuff.
I could feed an army. I am ready at all times. Well, tell me, as we're sort of wrapping up here, I want to think about how many other little tidbits we can share with the audience directly from you. So one thing I'd love to know is, what are your favorite resources? So where do you go when you need information? Who are the other food allergy advocates that you really trust and love to follow? Share with us your favorite resources.
Well, yeah. So again, we're 10 years in. So I, in the beginning, I would say to any new parent out there, the first thing I did, of course, was, hit Google, and FARE came up, and I learned a lot from the FARE website. And one of the first things I ever saw was Robin O'Brien's TED Talk. And I was like, oh my gosh, she's speaking just to me. And that was very helpful. So those are two things that I would tell any newly diagnosed family to dig into first. And then frankly, Hillary, Instagram's my friend. I mean, I've learned so much just from all the Instagrammers in the food allergy space that share product information. That's been really helpful. I have learned so much from Life with Itchy, Katie Green, my friend, about eczema. And I've I've purchased so many things on Amazon that she has suggested for Sydney, and they've been lifesavers. And then of course, all the awesome food products, the cake mixes and the snacks and everything. It's all on Instagram. That's been really helpful. Just type in food allergy in Instagram and all those people are going to come up. And I want to say too, and this kind of goes back to some of that podcast advice, whatever it is, obviously here it's food allergies. If you want to advocate, if you want to jump in the space and advocate in whatever way that is, a product, a service, a podcast, do it. There's no competition. We all are uniquely positioned to share a message and just get it out there and spread the word that we're here, we're in a fight, we need help. This is real. We need a cure. You know, listen, buy, participate, you know, whatever it is that you want to do in the space, do it without any hesitation that, you know, 10 other people are doing it. I mean, there's plenty of food allergy or allergy related podcasts, right? But everybody comes from with a different message and has a different role in, you know, how they're dealing with food allergies in their life. So just get out there and jump in. And you'll find a very supportive community.
Yes, you'll find a lot of us ready to grab your hand. That's just such amazing advice. And it's so true. I mean, there's 32 million Americans with food allergies, as we know. And the new stat that I've heard that I love is 85 million Americans are affected by food allergies, because you think about the whole family's affected. If not also the friends, the extended family in the classroom. It's a huge number. And so we need everyone's voices. And I just love yours. So thank you so much for your podcast. Thank you for joining me today. Tell everyone where they can find you online. Yeah, so I post most of my episode information on Instagram, Killer Food Allergies Podcast. And then, you know, LinkedIn, Facebook, but most everything is on Instagram. So yeah, give a follow. Good. Instagram is the best. Instagram is my friend too. And as you mentioned, it's the best. As you mentioned, FAIR is just an amazing resource and obviously one that I'm a huge fan of. So foodallergy.org is the best website for FAIR. Of course, you can check out the Living Teal channel on YouTube. There's so much amazing video content. It's really amazing. It's new. Check it out. You can find me at hillarytolcarter.com and on the gram at hillarytolcarter. Holly, this was fantastic. I could chat with you all day long, but I know you've got to go get to those wonderful girls. So thank you so much for joining me. Thank you for inspiring everyone out there to take action. Great. Thank you, Hillary. Appreciate it.